Hi, I'm Simon Sherborne from Avid, and in this session we'll walk you through your first Pro Tools project as a songwriter and recording musician. Pro Tools gets used in lots of different ways. As well as recording studios, there's TV and film sound design and mixing, and game sound, radio. In each type of work, there's different ways of setting up Pro Tools and building a project. So what we'll do in this video is concentrate on building a basic songwriting project. We'll get everything set up. We'll choose all the best modes and settings and tools for this kind of work. And then we'll look at the basics of operation inside Pro Tools to get you started. Okay, let's get stuck in. First thing you're going to see when you launch Pro Tools is the dashboard. And this is for creating or opening a project. So we're going to start by building a local session from scratch. So let's call this Pro Tools Session 1. Okay. I'm going to ask it to prompt for a location so that it will ask me where I want to store the project. Okay, I've got an audio projects folder where I keep most of my Pro Tools sessions, so I'm going to save it in there. So the first thing that I'm going to do is just check that my sound settings are correct. So I'm using a Focusrite USB audio interface here, which is where I'm listening on my headphones. It's also got my guitar plugged in. So I'm going to go to the Setup menu and look at the playback engine. And now I can see that my audio device is already chosen as Scarlett, so that's great. The other key setup areas are the I/O setup, which manages the connections I've got. We'll look at that when we start recording. And then the session setup, which is any settings for this particular project separate from my main system. Things like the sample rate and the bit depth and the session start time. Any other choices that you make about how Pro Tools operates tends to be in the preferences, where there's lots of pages of settings, but you don't need to set all those up to begin with. You'll figure those out as you go. Okay, well, let's make some adjustments to the layout. Pro Tools has opened up a few different windows here. It doesn't know what kind of project I'm going to work on, so it's kind of showing me everything. First off, I don't need to see the transport window because those controls are also available here. And it's showing me both the mix and the edit window. These are the two main work areas in Pro Tools. Everything that you do is going to happen in one of these windows. The interface is actually quite simple. So the mix window over here, this is your mixing console. It's where you choose inputs and outputs and you route signals and set levels. And in the edit window, this is your multi-track timeline where you're going to record and arrange audio and MIDI and automation. So normally if I'm working on a laptop on a smaller screen, I'd rather see one of these windows at a time. So I'm going to maximize the edit window and I can switch to the mix window and maximize that too, just double clicking the header. So now I can just switch between the two as I need them. And the first shortcut that most people learn in Pro Tools is the toggle between the mix and the edit window, which is Command equals or Control equals on Windows. Okay, let's simplify what we're looking at in the edit window. So there's a few different areas here. This area I don't need, it's called the universe. We can close that. I'm going to close the clips window for now. And we've got these various rulers that are showing. And depending on the kind of project, you don't need to see all these. So I'm going to click on bars and beats to make that the master time, which is perfect for writing music. And then from this pop-up menu here, I can hide these other rulers that we don't need to see. So that just leaves me with my main working area and then my tracks list, which will start to fill up as we create tracks. So to start this project, I'm just going to import a loop from the Pro Tools sound base just to give us something to work to. Okay, so from the Windows menu, I'm going to go to New Workspaces and Sound Base. So the Sound Base is a dedicated media browser inside Pro Tools where I can look at samples and loops and my projects. It's showing all of my locations on my drive here. And there's a sound libraries folder that I have in my Pro Tools folder which includes the Avid Loop Masters folder, which comes with Pro Tools. So there's a lot of stuff in here. I can filter by tags, I can search, and I can filter by types. I'm actually going to hide that filter there, simplify the view. Now, there's lots of stuff in here. I could just start auditioning. But what I want is a drum loop. So again, I could start to filter by beats and, drum kits. I want sort of a live feel. Again, there's still quite a lot which we could go through. And I'm actually going to bring up my favorites list to save time here, where I've got some things I know I want to work with. So I favorited these two earlier, essentially the same groove, but one's slightly more upbeat with some hi-hats. So I'm going to actually use both of them so that we've got some kind of a verse beat and then something for a chorus to lift it a little bit. So right now I'm auditioning these loops at their original tempo. If I click this button here, I will audition them at the tempo of the session, which is a bit slower. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to bring this in, and because nothing else is in the session, Pro Tools will actually give me the option to take my session tempo from the loop that I'm bringing in, rather than conforming the loop to the session. So let me show you how that works. I'm just going to make sure I'm in grid mode, and I'm going to zoom to the start of the session. I'm going to go back to the workspace using my window toggle, which on a Mac is Command tilde. And let's grab one of these loops. It's this one. And just drop that in. And just drop it into an empty space in the timeline. And it's asking me, do I want to import the original tempo from the file? So let's do that. Okay. And you'll see now that my tempo track is showing that we're now 140 beats per minute from here, which has come from this clip. Okay, again, I'm Command tilde to go back to my other window, and we'll bring in the other clip as well. There we go. Now, while we've got some material in the track, we'll just show you some Pro Tools basics. First thing I'll just show you is that in the mix window, we now have a track. So everything that is in the edit window always appears in the mix window. It's just a different view of the same object in your project. Next thing is you can see I'm moving this around. So the tools for manipulating data are here, and I'm using this default tool called the Smart tool, which will change what it does depending on where you click the cursor. So in the bottom half of a clip, it's moving. In the top half, it will select time. If I'm near the edge, it will trim. Or if I'm in a corner, it will fade. So it does most of the things that you might need, and there are some subtle variations depending on what you want to do. Now notice that my movements and my selections are being tied to the grid, which currently is set to beats. You can see that here, quarter notes. If I wanted to move this clip without snapping to the grid, I can either switch to slip mode, my edit modes, or I can hold down the Command key or the Control key if I'm on Windows, and that will temporarily swap. That's the same if I'm in slip mode, I can temporarily switch to the grid. That's just a really handy trick because you'll use that all the time. Okay, the other thing to mention now is that every time I hit play or hit the space bar, what you're hearing is whatever's selected in the track. Or if I drop the cursor here, it's just going to play there. So Pro Tools defaults to this mode where it's always playing whatever's focused in the tracks in the edit selection. Now you can separate that if you want so that you can set in and out points in the time ruler or play position is separate from edit. And there are some link buttons here to explore there's also a mode called dynamic transport, which sets Pro Tools up like a sort of traditional MIDI sequencer. So you can see that I can set an in and out point for play, and that won't be affected by anything that I select. So it's really handy if you're editing a loop and you just want to keep auditioning it, but be editing the loop. I can also pick up that whole range and move it and set the play positions independently of my loop. Okay, so I am going to mainly be recording audio, and I'm more accustomed to working the other way. So I'm going to switch dynamic transport back off there and go back to how I'm used to working. So one last thing in terms of setup is keyboard shortcuts. So in Pro Tools, a lot of the functions that you'll be using are available with single key presses. Obviously, we have spacebar for play, but things like zooming and editing, we need to enable that using this button here. This is the keyboard focus button for editing. And I leave that on all the time in Pro Tools. And Pro Tools will remember all of these settings and views that I'm choosing now. And the next project that I open, all of this will be already there. So I don't need to do this again. Now, what I'm mainly going to use is the zoom shortcuts. So you can see before that I used these zoom tools in the toolbar, but the R and T key on the keyboard always zoom the view centered on whatever you've got selected. Next to those keys, you'll also see the E key, which explodes the view for whatever's selected. So if I hit E, you'll see I can go straight into fine editing mode. If I hit the E key again, it's going to zoom back out to a higher level. Okay, let's set up the session then for some recording. So I've got these two sections. Let's actually set a slightly different color for these just while we're here. I'm going to push this one out of the way, and I just want to loop this for a few more bars so that we've got a bit more space. Now I could duplicate it with Command D. Let me undo that with Z. Or I can use the loop trimmer. So if I set my trimmer tool to loop, instead of changing the boundaries of the clip, it will actually add more and loop it. Okay, so let's stretch that out to 16 bars. I'll grab my chorus section and do the same with that. Let's put it to there to give me another 16 bars. Okay, so let's record some guitar. So first thing I need to do is to create an audio track. So the tracks menu is always available for creating new tracks if you haven't learned the shortcuts yet. So new, mono audio track, and we'll call this guitar now. There we go. I'm going to change the color of it. Just double click on there and set a different color. So I've got something to record into. Now I need to set an input for the track. So before we do that, let's have a look at our inputs and outputs, which are in the I/O setup. So in here, on the inputs tab, I can see the two inputs on my Focusrite Scarlett. They're grouped in Pro Tools currently as a pair for if you wanted to record in stereo, but I can open that up and see the two individual inputs, and I can rename them. So let's rename this one guitar, just so that it's easy to find. There we go. Now I could set the input from the mixer here, but I can also view that here. So a lot of the mix parameters are viewable on this page if I come into here. Let's view inserts, that's my plugins, and I/O. Okay, so we can see from the input selected, it's already chosen the guitar. So now if I arm this track, we should see input from my amp, which is going into the Focusrite. So okay, so I can see signal on my interface. I can see signal coming in on Pro Tools. Now, right now, we're listening to Pro Tools coming through the interface into Pro Tools and back out to my headphones. Now, in some situations, especially with a USB interface, there will be some kind of a delay inherent in doing that. If that's distracting, then this interface has a direct monitor mode here, which if I press that button, then I'm hearing the sound straight back to my headphones, not going via the computer. But as you can hear, we're hearing that twice now. So Pro Tools has a mode called low latency monitoring, and that simply mutes the return from Pro Tools to my headphones, so I'm only hearing it once. It will still play back anything that I record, but while I'm recording or monitoring the input, it will mute that sound. So I have a kind of an idea of something to work on here. But before I actually start recording, I'm going to make a couple of adjustments. One thing, I need to add a click so that I can get a count in. Now, my MIDI controls can be opened from here, and that's where I'll find things like the metronome count in. So if I enable count off, the click is already enabled, but I need to assign a click track to this project. And that's done in the track menu, create click track. That's going to make this new track, which is the source of my click, which you'll hear now if I hit play. I'm also probably going to speed this up a little bit. It's a kind of half speed groove. So although it's 140 beats per minute, it could do with being a bit faster. So let's just push that up a little bit. Bit more lively. Okay, and because that was an elastic audio track, that's just sped everything up. Right, so I'm going to use the F12 key on my laptop to start recording. That's the shortcut when you don't have a keypad. Let's see what happens. Okay, so I already made a mistake, but the first part wasn't too bad. I should point out that I'm a synth guy, so please forgive my guitar playing. So I'm going to hit the return key, which is going to always send me back to the beginning. Let's have a quick listen. Yeah. So to be honest, it kind of started going off about here. So what I want to do is I'm actually going to punch in here. So I'm going to drop my cursor about here so that we can just punch in. What I'd like to do is hear what I played before up to that point. So I'm actually going to choose a pre-roll, and that's done from the expanded transport section here. So let's turn off the count off and switch to a pre-roll, and we'll give myself 2 bars. There we go. So again, I can hit F12. Okay, let's have a listen to that take. So let's have another stab at this one. This time I'm going to make a selection. Let's go through there. So let's do that again. Okay, so we could probably perfect this over a few more takes. We could make some complete new playlists is another option. So in Pro Tools, I can actually come in here and create a new playlist, and that gives me a whole fresh palette to work with, and I can choose from my different takes, but we won't get into that in this session. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to take this track out of record arm. Let's just trim the edge there. Okay, so let's go ahead and record some bass. So I'm going to unplug my guitar. Need a bit more gain. Okay, so we just need to make another track. Let's hide the click track. Don't really need to see that. So again, a new track. This one we'll call bass. And we can give that a different color. So this is a quick shortcut. If you want to make another track the same as the most recent one that you made, you can just double click in the timeline and you'll get another track the same. So that's a handy shortcut. Let's delete that by right clicking on it. So this time it's set it to the next input. So I'm going to put it back to guitar and we'll record on this track. Hit return to go back to the beginning. And we'll put our count off back in. Okay, so let's just quickly set some levels and see what we've got. Let's switch the colors on in the mixer because I like to see those. So my guitar sounds quite thin when it's coming in through an amp like that. So let's see if we can just EQ it to make it sound a bit better. I'm going to use the built-in channel strip in Pro Tools, which looks like this. Just compress it a little bit. Let's give it a bit of a bass boost. So I can actually solo it if I want to hear it on its own. So this is going to adjust the bass. Just reduce the Q a little bit. And give it some top end as well. use the filter just to roll off the very bottom. There we go. And I could actually add a bass amp to my bass guitar sound. So for example, we've got the 11 rack, 11 Mark II plugin built into Pro Tools. And let's just quickly choose a bass amp. Go with dark. So let's just have a quick look at recording some internal instruments inside Pro Tools on a MIDI track. So I'm going to create a instrument track, a stereo instrument track. Don't know what it's going to be yet. Let's move that to the bottom. This is essentially a MIDI track that can host a virtual instrument and has its own audio path. So I can look in my plugins at the instrument section. And let's look at something that comes built in with Pro Tools, which is Expand. There we go. So this is like a multi-purpose toolkit of synths and drum sounds. My MIDI keyboard is already set up with the Mac, so I should just be able to hit record on that track and listen to it. Now, a handy preference in Pro Tools for music is if you go to Setup Preferences, go to the MIDI tab, you can choose the default through instrument, and that essentially is whatever's going to play even if nothing is recorded. So I can choose a specific track for this, but normally I'd set it to follow first selected MIDI track. So I thought that I would like to do something with some strings, and there's a patch that I really like for very quickly adding some strings, which is the Pizzicato ARP. Let's try something then. So I've got my count off on still, record arm, F12. So now I've got some material to work with. I could start thinking about maybe making some arrangement decisions. I could go in and separate these sections, for example. If I drop the cursor and press the B key, that's going to separate these clips so that I can treat them as separate sections. I could grab whole chunks of this data here and move it. But I'm going to leave it there for now. So thank you very much for watching. I hope that's been useful. Do make sure you check out the Avid channel on YouTube and avid.com. We've got loads more videos, tips and tricks and techniques, and we'll catch you next time.